This week on Waterways, coral nurseries, and the Turner River Restoration Project. Coral reefs are slivers of habitat whose richness far exceeds their size. They occupy less than 0.2% of the area of our oceans, yet they are vital to the health of the oceans and the people who live near them. Coral reefs support more than 1/3 of all species of marine fish and are directly related to the overall health of the planet's oceans. Unfortunately, reefs are in decline worldwide. In many parts of the world, including Florida and the Caribbean, vibrant, colorful living reefs have become algae-choked, bone-colored coral rock skeletons. Scientists have meticulously probed for the causes of reef degradation: pollution, disease, climate change, overfishing, or maybe all of these factors rolled together. But there is one destroyer of reefs about which the scientists have no doubt. Each year, wayward boats ranging in size from pleasure craft to freighters plow into reefs, scattering the pieces over the seafloor. Fortunately today, this is damage scientists may be able to repair.
When a boat goes on the reef, they break corals up. Some of the corals are large enough that we can actually cement back or in some way reattach them to the reef platform, and they'll grow and reattach hopefully to the reef itself. Some pieces are so small that they'll just roll around in the wave surge and or get covered by sediment and die.
These coral fragments that we're rescuing are fragments that are too small to reattach, have fallen into crevices, will not grow, so they would be lost unless we went out there to follow up on this kind of stuff. So what we're doing is rescuing these fragments, bringing them in, and then reestablishing and stabilizing them under this type of nursery conditions. And those are the ones. So we're not really going out and harvesting corals from the wild to do studies on or to bring into the nursery. We're actually taking corals that would be lost to us.
For the past 10 years at Biscayne National Park, researchers have cultivated gardens of coral, hoping to provide a source of new coral to repopulate damaged reefs. When the nursery project began, funds were limited. Therefore, Richard Curry recruited Dan DiResta from the University of Miami. The Coral Nursery Project is an example of the mutual benefits that occur when the National Park Service teams up with partners like the University of Miami. Students from the university gain valuable field experience, researchers gain important data, resource managers get a helping hand, and the reefs get much-needed attention.
So it's kind of, we're scratching each other's back. It's a way of getting free research done in the park. And like I said, the Park Service is not a research agency, nor is it a funding agency. And we really have minimal dollars to actually manage the areas that we have. So without those partnerships, both the University of Miami, University of Wilmington, and other schools that participate in the park, we wouldn't be able to manage these resources with the success that we have to date.
When you're in school, all you're doing is bookwork, studying, reading, and that's not much fun. And when you get out here, you actually get a lot of hands-on experience. You actually get to utilize what you learn. So it's more realistic than actually sitting behind a desk and taking tests.
Like our ancestors, who thousands of years ago began to cultivate grains and vegetables, researchers at Biscayne National Park have taken to cultivating coral polyps. The first step in cultivation is collecting small pieces and preparing them for the nursery.
Okay, this is a piece of coral that we're going to be taking out into or cutting up and putting into the nursery. We're probably cutting it up into 1-inch squares. Normally we wouldn't take a piece this size, we would just glue it in the environment because it's healthy enough to survive on its own. But you can see that this piece came off an old seawall and it doesn't have a holdfast anymore. I've cut this big chunk of coral in half. You can see where the iron is still left from the old seawall. We'll cut that away. What we're going to save is this part up here. Here's the PVC rod that we're using. And we'll take a magnetic pit tag and put it in here and put a chunk of epoxy on it. Mount the coral this way. We put the pit tag into the epoxy, like so. Put the epoxy so that the pit tag falls in the notch. Then we spread the epoxy over the coral somewhat neatly. Then we take the PVC stake and put it approximately where the pit tag would be. This is how he ends. We've got kind of like an ice cream popsicle here. You can see the coral is on top. The coral will start to grow over the edges of the epoxy. And we keep the stake is to hold it out in the water column so that we have water flowing over it. 10 years from now or more, it might be ready to go out in the environment.
Coral popsicles that the team prepares will be in the nursery until they reach sexual maturity, or about 6 inches in diameter. Even under perfect environmental conditions, most coral species grow less than ½ an inch per year. Therefore, this project requires much patience. When the corals are ready, students from the University of Miami bring the corals out to the nursery. This nursery is located in a tidal channel next to Boca Chica Key, a few miles shoreward from the reef, a place many would not expect to see coral.
We first started out in 1992, just after Hurricane Andrew, trying to decide where we would establish a nursery. And I picked 3 spots. One that I thought was the absolute worst place to locate a nursery for corals. One place I thought was optimal, which was the center of the coral reef platform, where there were a whole bunch of coral reefs. And then a marginal place that was out on the coral reef platform break, where it goes off to the continental shelf. And it turned out that the corals that we transplanted onto those early structures were growing the greatest here in the canals or the tidal creeks, and absolutely miserably on the coral reef itself, and we're not sure why.
Scientists guess that the tidal creeks protect coral from many of the stresses that afflict the reef. The tidal channels are also convenient for another reason. They are close to islands that act as a base of operations for nursery care.
When we first did it, we had concrete pyramids and the corals were growing over the structure itself, and we had no way of getting the corals off the structure.
By using removable coral popsicles and by locating these popsicles close to shore, scientists have made it easy to collect a wealth of data about the coral.
There have been a number of researchers, and still are a number of researchers, that are growing corals in the environment, where they take coral fragments and without cutting them up or anything else, they just cement them to the surface and been monitoring those corals over time and watching their growth and trying to estimate what the growth rates are based on length and width and height and that kind of stuff. The unique thing about our nursery is that over the last year or so, we've actually started putting them on these PVC posts so we can remove them from the environment, we can weigh them, we can get their volume, we can take pictures of them, we can count the polyps, we can get all the growth statistics we can. So this is really a learning experience, and nobody else has really got this opportunity that I'm aware of worldwide. So we're kind of a cutting-edge process here.
Every 3 months, the students and researchers collect the popsicles to measure and evaluate them. Divers collect the specimens and hand them off to snorkelers hovering above. Then, the corals are brought to a temporary science station nearby.
What we're doing is removing the algae that grows in around the coral, so we're very carefully scraping it clean so we can get a good weight. And the corals are pretty hardy. They can be out of the water for quite a while before they dry down and suffocate.
Scraping the algae from the popsicles is like pulling weeds from a garden. If the algae are allowed to proliferate, it can limit the growth of the coral. As some students scrape away the unwanted algae, others are busy weighing and measuring the cleaned popsicles. Then, digital photos are taken so that the coral growth can later be visually scrutinized. The data that students and researchers collect can provide information about the health of different coral species in different water quality parameters. Some corals in the nursery have proved more resilient to environmental stressors than others.
This one is really healthy in the fact that you can see that it's got good color all around. It's growing well over the edges that were cut, so the coral is actually growing very nicely. This porous of Diploria here You can see it hasn't grown over the epoxy at all. In fact, the edges are already dying. So whether this piece will make it or not is subject to debate. The cervicornis we've had a lot of problem with. You can see that we put it out and it was nice and healthy. It was a broken edge right here. It started to recover probably over the summer months. And then when some of the cold winter water got on it, it killed the corals.
Biscayne's goal is to eventually have 2,000 coral pieces in their nurseries. The park plans to make the nursery-grown coral available to any public agency working in South Florida.
To date, I'd say the project in nursery development has been an extreme success. We're seeing the coral fragments growing. We're seeing tissue growing over the cut edges very rapidly. We see greater growth in the summertime than we see in the wintertime. And we're actually seeing, if you take an average growth rate, we're seeing about 0.5 gram each quarter.
But some of these coral fragments may do more than help repopulate the reef. They may help us to understand why reefs are in trouble.
Really, it's very difficult to get corals into the lab. If we can establish a coral supply for researchers to do physiological, biochemical growth studies from corals that have been rescued from grounding sites and stabilized under laboratory conditions, it would be really a great help to coral researchers around the country.
Coral researchers will use these corals to investigate how pathogens, changing climate, and pollution affect the reef. The answers they glean from them may help us solve these larger problems.
People think that here we can take these corals and repopulate reefs that are undergoing decline. Whatever the stressor is still present on the reef. So transplanting these corals out to the reef is not going to save reefs unless we do things to remove the stresses. This project is wonderful for when there is really kind of catastrophic damage like a grounding or mechanical damage to storms and things like that, where after it's over, the stressor is removed.
Scientists have a limited ability to reverse global reef degradation. The problems that plague coral reefs can only be solved when people understand their plight and take action to protect them. Scientists and educators at Biscayne National Park would like to give visitors, students, and community members the chance to develop a sense of stewardship for the reefs. They intend to invite people to assist with activities at the nursery, just like these University of Miami undergraduates. The coral nurseries established by Biscayne National Park and the University of Miami may not save the coral reefs. However, the 2,000 specimens that may one day grow in these nurseries may provide seeds that damaged reefs need to repopulate and recover. At the very least, the new data will help scientists and managers better understand the plight of this treasured resource. South Florida in the 1950s. A tropical paradise that seduced retirees, returning servicemen, and vacationers. People flooded to Florida.
We'd like to take you to a very special place.
Optimistic developers planned roads, subdivisions, and industrial parks on the land just west of the Everglades in the Big Cypress Swamp. But others had a different hope for Florida and rushed to protect one of the state's least spoiled treasures, the Big Cypress Swamp. Located north and west of the Everglades, Big Cypress National Preserve protects 729,000 acres of cypress strands, wet prairies, and pine islands. The expansive mosaic of wetlands within the preserve accounts for 2/5 of the water that flows into Everglades National Park. That's 40% of the fresh water that reaches the Everglades coast. The Turner River is one of the most important channels connecting Big Cypress to the coast, helping to maintain the health of the vital coastal estuarine ecosystem. Until recently, it was a river that wasn't working the way a river should.
In the late 1950s, Turner River Road, Bird-on Road, and Upper Wagon Wheel Road were built with the idea that there would be eventual residential development in that area. The road beds were formed by excavating what was then became the canal, and using that material to make the roadbed, this severely altered the hydrology. When the preserve was established in 1974, the Park Service wanted to go in and modify these canals, modify the roadbeds to return the hydrology in that area to more of its natural character.
Turner River Road extends for 20 miles from Tamiami Trail to an area north of I-75 called Bear Island. Along with Upper Wagon Wheel Road and Birdon Road, Turner River Road may appear to the casual observer as just roads. But to water residing in adjacent wetlands, these roads have acted like dams, blocking the sheet flow of water that used to flow to the Turner River. Besides blocking the sheet flow, the dams also channeled waters into canals. Once in the canals, the water travels quickly to CHEVA Bay, much more quickly than if the canals were absent and instead flowed down the Turner River. This change in the landscape acted as a drain on the surrounding ecosystem, emptying millions of gallons of water per day from the wetlands and prairies.
In all this road building and canal building, not only was Turner River impacted, but areas to the north of it were as well, including where we're standing. This prairie that we're standing right now actually holds water for less amount of time and at shallower levels than just north of the road.
As sheet flow into Turner River from the north and east slowed to a trickle, the river began to change. Plants began to grow in the river's channel, filling in places that were historically kept open by the current. This choked channel then began to fill with sediment. The plants and sediment, and the lack of water, turned the flowing river into a choked channel that was almost impossible to navigate even with a canoe.
With the headwaters of the Turner River being cut off from the Turner River, flows within the Turner River dropped, and water levels within the Turner River dropped, and as a result the water stagnated, it filled in with vegetation, and we had a condition similar to what we would see here. In fact, when the Park Service went back to finally went in to think about restoring the river, it was a challenge to go in there and delineate where the old river channel was.
Park staff drafted a restoration plan in 1980, but money for the project did not arrive until 1988, when the Park Service partnered with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, South Florida Water Management District, and Collier County to obtain the people and equipment necessary to get the project underway. Thus began the Turner River Restoration Project. Its mission? Restore water to the river, and by restoring the river, restore the strands and prairies.
We're at Turner River Canal. This canal used to flow all the way down to CHEVA Bay, but in 1988, a series of 19 earthen plugs were added to slow water down in these canals, and then a series of 8 culverts were added across the roadbed to push water across into the adjacent wetlands across the road. It's designed to block water flow, form a slack water pool behind it, and then the culverts were added to get water across the road and back into the Turner River, as opposed to having it run all the way out to tide down the canal. This is the new headwater watershed for the Turner River. Historically, sheet flow used to naturally flow into the headwaters of the Turner River and then meander the 9 miles to tide. But now with our new system, with Turner River Road blocking that sheet flow regime, we have the culverts as our new watershed delivery system for the Turner River.
By creating plugs to block the flow of water down the man-made canal, and by passing culverts underneath Turner River Road, the restoration team was able to get more water into the Turner River, but not enough.
Now, when we put in these plugs in 1988, we've noticed some unintended consequences. We found that a lot of more water went to the river, but we also had the problem of water flowing around the earthen plug, as we can see here. That's the one thing I've learned since being in South Florida, a hydrologist in South Florida, is that in fact water has a mind of its own. We can put in plugs, we can put in culverts, but sometimes the water doesn't go in the culverts as much as we want, or around the plugs and down the canal. So that's our opportunity to employ this empirical or trial and error methodology and establish a dialogue with the water. collect data, see what the water's saying to us, and then modify the restoration program appropriately to get a better result.
Scientists and engineers can do their best to predict what water will do, but they will never know for certain what will happen until they put the plugs and culverts in place. Scientists like Bob call this approach empiricism, learning by doing, then watching the results.
We do a restoration action knowing that it's going to help out, and then we monitor the result and learn from the result and build upon the success to make it a larger success. And in fact, that's been something that's really been a hallmark of the Turner River restoration.
The plugs and culverts helped, but did not have the impact the Park Service had hoped for. So the next step was more ambitious. The Park Service decided to eliminate the canal downstream of the Tamiami Trail.
In 1996, restoration actions were taken to fill the southern 2 miles of this canal in. And this did two things. It prevented water from shooting down the canal, and for the first time, water flow in the river actually exceeded water flow down the canal. The second thing, it forced recreationalists, your canoers, your fishermen, to go to the river.
Today, Turner River is close to looking like it did before the local roads were built. Though the restoration team continues to monitor water levels and to contemplate future adjustments to the road and canal, the results of their work are easy to see.
Well, canoeing on the Turner River is when you really see the payoff of what the restoration's all about. 20 years ago, this wasn't a possibility. It was a vegetation-choked river corridor that didn't have the water levels to support canoeing. But now, as a restored system, it gives our visitors an opportunity to get out and enjoy the diversity that the river corridor has to offer, and really good feel for the Big Cypress National Preserve.
When the preserve was established, Park Service staff inherited an ecosystem whose shell had been broken. Through plugs, culverts, fill, and a commitment to keep trying new solutions, the broken shell of the Turner River has been pieced back together. While the Turner River may never be exactly as it was, it is acting like a river again, carrying fresh water slowly to tide. Water is staying longer in the strands and prairies, and a new balance has been struck between people and nature.